Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining in. We are extremely excited for our second webinar, which is part of our Unibrow Film Festival. And we have partnered with Ishi, a young, bubbling, positive, creative team from Ukhrul. They are based in Ukhrul, but their members are all over India. And Unibrow Studio is really proud to be partnering with them. And before we start the session, I also want to thank our sponsors, the amazing women entrepreneurs of Manipur. Um, Myra Foods, Hill Wild, Dwellities, Gugu Foods, and Papa Cakes and Bakes. Without their support, we wouldn't be here with this amazing experience and uh, you know uh, renowned with lots of knowledge panelist. And I would like our moderator, another young member of Ishi, Sokmi, to please start the session. Sokmi, please start.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Yeah, we are 6 minutes against the time. Okay, thank you, Shim. I welcome everyone in today's webinar. Adding a bit of information to what Shim has said, this webinar is a part of the Unibrow Film Festival 2021, a partnership of Ishi and Unibrow Studio. Like Shim has mentioned, um, this partnership is supported by women entrepreneurs of Manipur, Myra Foods, Hilwald, Popa Cakes and Bakes, Gugu Foods, and Dwellities. We have Dr. Theisuno Ketitsu. I hope I got the name right, Dada Mangangsana, and then Dr. Achan Mumleng as our panelists today. So without any further delay, I think we should move on to having our first panelist speak to us. The Damangsana, the floor is yours.
As my topic is about tradition. Yeah, so let me say something about tradition, because since I have been grown, I was grown with a very much strict tradition. Like I should not do these things. I should do these things only. Since I was born in very strict family, but somehow I grown up and I could reach up to so many people around the globe with the different disciplines like dance, music, theater, as well as scholars and academicians. And very lately, was around 2000s, in the 21st century, early 21st century, I realized that tradition is something which carries our past history and our past uh, livinghood, and how we survive and how we establish ourselves in this world. Since when I came to know that the foremost the tradition of Lai Haroba. Lai Haroba is some of you might have understand what is Lai Haroba means, but in Manipuri, especially the Meitei communities, the Lai Haroba is one of the most important traditional practices, traditional rituals, and yeah, of course, it is a very earliest religious practice. In Lai Haroba, there is no there's no foreign deities. In the Lai Haroba, we actually uh, praise for our ancestors, our past histories, that our far beliefs, that how the art was created, how the sky was created, and how the living beings was created, and how we are civilized, and how we are being today. these are all practiced in Laiharoba, and these practices are came through music, dance, and more artificial, more artistic presentations like costumes, colors, and designs of the house, and designing the uh, our ritual sites. And since because I was grown up with such kind of very old, very archaic traditions, I always believe since my childhood that this tradition should not be changed or should not be defied at any form or anything. So it becomes like a this Laiharoba tradition becomes like my own blood flowing inside my bodies. But somehow I come across with many religion and many tradition and many different communities around this world. And finally, I realized that okay, Laiharoba is such a thing we the Meitei people believes, and because of this belief, we are surviving as well as we are uh, existing in this modern world to defy ourselves. Okay, we are the Meiteis. And then I also realized that art forms like music, dance, costumes, colors, designing of the ritual sites, everything is an art which has been coming through for the ages through these beliefs. So tradition is something what that's we believe, and that is because of how we surviving and how we are growing up and how we civilize. It is what I really uh, I realize very lately. I'm very sorry. So right now, through that traditions of Laiharoba, through that performance of the Laiharoba, through that uh, designs and colors and everything, it is which where the all the artistic aspects are there. Because of that, I'm very proud that which becomes very unique art form in this modern world. And so, so all of you might understand what I'm saying because this kind of the traditions which give us proudness, this give us very sensible how we survive, how we are living, and how we are connected through generations by generation and generation. The, but nowadays, everything becomes so fast. Everything changes so fast since the this kind of medias and electronics things has become so fast that such we people like very indigenous people like us are having some very great problems that we are not able to chase this kind of advancement of the modern generation, modern tradition. I would say modern tradition because this kind of electrical or electronic or this kind of modern technology becomes so fast since around very 18th century. So since I have been in America, I have been in Europe, or I have been in Japan, I have encountered with those people who have been in a very advanced stage. But always, I was very happy to know that they like us. At the same time, I can make very much uh, connected. I can connect it with them through this kind of traditions. Since because they have lost their traditions, or maybe they have not been practicing or continuing their very old traditions, or maybe something else, because they are searching for the old traditions like that the Americans have Smithsonian Museum or Smithsonian Institute. They are still caring about very old tradition, very old cultures of all over the world. At the same time, that's the England also doing this such things, and even the Japan's also doing such thing. They have a very great museums and institution. They have been collecting very old tradition and the cultural activities happens in, in this world. So I am to say there's a very two there's a very uh, two different ways how we can mean how is the tradition in the pros ways or in the cons ways. Sometimes by the tradition we have been divided, but the traditions makes us uh, connections between the humans, between the naturals, between the heavens and between the sky and earth. So to me, we don't have to be there to change the traditions. We don't have to there defy the traditions. Tradition is very much natural, and it comes through us, through humans, through the living beings, through the natures. So tradition is something we don't have to create. It is a very much natural way. So there should not be any perspective or, but of course we have to know how much it changed. So we have to calculate by archiving it, not by uh, not by myself that I'm going to change these things and I'm because everything the tradition has made us. So we have to go through this. We don't have to defy it. I mean, so sometimes for being now I'm giving you I'm sharing one of my experience last my some few performances that like in the Manipuri tradition, the musical instruments should not be touched by our feet because they are like my parents or like my gurus, my teachers, and touching by my foot, which means this is disregarding my gurus, my parents, my father, or my mother. So, in that sense, sometimes I have to reassemble or to rectify the instrument. Somewhere I'm going to performance. I'm going to give performance. Sometimes the instrument got broken or instrument got something wrong. At times I have to touch my instrument with my both hands and my foot to make to rectify the instruments. So I have to do that. And it was it was around some 1986 while I was performing in Patna for the first time for my life for the National Folk Festival. I was invited there to perform, and during my rail travel, I brought my string, the instrument string. So I was so curious that of course, I have some extra uh, string horse tail with my instrument, which was directed by my gurus to give extra horse string always. But it was my first time that I never tried to rectify my instrument in my life. So I was so afraid. In 1980s, I am not able to call upon my teachers to what to do. So by the time I pray, I have to bow to my instrument and I have to carry the instrument with my both feet, and I have to make my own instrument to rectify it or make managed to play it again. And afterwards, I was so happy that so many people was very much excited on my performance. Even by the time the director of the art and culture, Sri Chongtham Samarendra, he was very much excited. He greeted me a lot. So that is the
O-
moment.
Oja,
Oh,
I'm so sorry, I'm cutting you in between. But
okay,
you know, we are we have given 5 to 10 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes to
okay,
each
I'm
of the
very sorry.
panelists. So yeah, I mean, just you can maybe finish it up, and then we can go to the next panelist.
Okay, that is the thing, that the tradition, sometimes tradition make us too much stubborn, and sometimes we have to learn tradition, which is makes us carry on. So uh, it is each and every one's consider it to be considered ourselves. What should we do with our tradition? Uh, but no, I would to say we don't have to dare to change or defy our tradition. We have to understand our tradition. Either it is a perspective or it is a vision of our tradition. That's all. Sim, please carry on.
Thank you so much, Oja. So people, that was Oja Mangangsana, the founder and artistic director of Livelihood Ensemble. They have been working relentlessly, exposing and promoting the rich indigenous folk and traditional art forms of Manipur at various international platforms. You can check them out. They have done amazing works. And I think just to sum up what Dr. Oja was saying was, I think we need to respect our traditions before jumping into anything else. So yeah, I think now it's time for uh, another amazing woman of Northeast, Madam. I think I'm just gonna say Ma'am Kidetsu because I don't know how to pronounce your first name. Ma'am, please take it away.
Okay, thank you very much, Unibrow, for giving me this opportunity to share some thoughts with you. The question that you're given me was, how much should one's creation be the interpretation of their research? And I want to begin by asking, is there such a thing as creation? Is it possible to create out of thin air? This is the kind of creation performed by divine beings or forces. In fact, their ability to perform this miraculous alchemy, creating form from void, life from insensibility or even death, etc., that is the central argument for why they are divine and we are not. So for us mortals, the question is not how much of one's creation is the interpretation of their research. For us, creation is a spectrum of inspiration, collation, amalgamation, and appropriation. In literature, even fantasy, that last frontier realm of fiction, when examined properly, is merely a pastiche of elements taken from our empirical realities. In science, inventions, the creation of things that did not exist before, are permutations and combinations of prior discoveries and inventions. So while some creations are the result of explicit formal research, even if one says they have not undertaken any obvious research to create something, they also still use the corpus of knowledge and experience they have amassed over the course of their lives. So if we accept that all creation is the interpretation of research, formal or informal, we are able to move on to the more pertinent question, which is that, is there such a thing as ethical creation? And how do we set parameters for ethical creation? I understand ethical creation as paying one's debts. And this is something that I think particularly Northeastern cultures, we really have a appreciation and sense of what it means to pay one's debts. And that may entail some soul searching, taking one's creation apart demystifying it and tracing the genealogy of both the components and the processes that came together to create that thing. So creation, in a sense, demands that we acknowledge the obligations we have to those who have come before us, whether it's people, forces, and circumstances that generate contexts within which and through which we create. If current debates in the world of music, fashion, film, literature, and even academia are anything to go by, it is no longer possible or certainly not ethical for someone to claim that they have created, in the orthodox sense, something out of nothing. So, what are these obligations we are talking about? It is not enough just to do research or to give credit to research. We must also look at the position of the creator or researcher vis-a-vis the thing or the person or the cultures they have researched. Because creation is embedded within the political economy of knowledge production, one that has long been extractive and one way, whether it is in the rise of Western cultures, in the sense that, we understand the Western Renaissance as having been possible only because, of the knowledge that came from the East, from the Ottoman Empire to the West, or the subsequent era of imperialism and colonialism, or in our current neoliberal capitalist times. For a very long time, no credit had been given to powerless colonies and their cultures and subjects. In post-colonial times, we are beginning to question this exploitation. Concepts like cultural appropriation now allow us to reconstruct and retrace footprints in the sand back to the source of many materials, designs, and concepts that until now masquerade as original creations. And by this, I mean something even as simple as language. The idea, because when we, for example, the word shampoo is actually comes from India. And so when we start taking into account, sort of Orientalist, racist assumptions about cleanliness, hygiene, as the colonizer bringing hygiene and cleanliness to the colonies, then something like shampoo, which we associate with, sort of physical hygiene, is actually something that the word comes from India. So we were washing our hair much before, the British came. So a simple example like that. Thanks to globalization and an information revolution that has connected people all over the world in intricate, intimate networks, the powerless now exercise some agency to hold creators accountable. And on that account, having webinars in this medium, particularly the digital medium, is something very interesting. I think the digital universe has actually opened up the world in a way that was impossible. It has leveled hierarchies. It has leveled access. Sort of, for example, fashion. If whereas the common normal person in other parts of the world would not be able to access the fashion creations of luxury fashion houses in Europe. Now, because of this digital revolution, we are able to see and we are able to hold some of these fashion houses accountable when they take designs from ethnic and indigenous communities and pose it as their creations. So these kind of possibilities are exciting, particularly for people from the Northeast, as in general, people who are marginalized, who are exploited, whether it is our culture or whether it is, our rights. The digital universe holds a great promise of empowering us to hold creators accountable, but at the same time, facilitate the ways we create and present our creations on a level playing field. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kiditsu. So people, that was Ma'am Kiditsu. True to her profile, she gave a very thought-provoking presentation, and it makes me feel like I really need to attend some of your class, you know, and learn some, maybe suck some of your knowledge from your brain and put it into mine. The next one we have is Dr. Achan Munglen, another awesome woman from Manipur, and she's an anthropologist. Apart from that, she's working on various uh, projects such as gender equality, traditional handloom, and textiles and sustainable development. Dr. Achan, please take it away.
Thank you, Shim, for giving me the time. Um, well, I'm not an expert on this subject matter, but just because we have been talking a lot about ownership, and especially when it comes to handloom and textiles, so I just thought maybe I'll just share some of my personal experiences. So that's why I'm here. The title that was given to me is ownership subjective. So yes, if we are talking about community ownership, then it is subjective. Because subjective, when we talk of subjectivity, then it talks about the meanings, the opinions, the preferences, the values, the feelings, and the judgment that we have on a particular object or on certain space or material culture or some of the things that we give meanings to those things. So those objects or those things that we give meanings to, that particular thing, it might be very meaningful for us, but for the others, it may not be meaningful. And therefore, when we give meanings to it, then we look at that as a part of our identity. And when we look at it as a part of our identity, then we owned up that one. And so when the question of our identity is being threatened, and that's where we start talking about ownership, and therefore a lot of conflict that we see around the world is essentially based on ownership. And so ownership is subjective for me, but the question also, the next thing, if we look at it as being subjective, then the next thing that comes to me is at what context. That's also important for me. Like, for example, if we are looking in terms of the historical context, the geographical context, and also the ethnic relations, because I think we always need to remember that a lot of us from this part of the region, we have lots of common histories, the migration, and then geographical locations. We are here, they are there, like we are different ethnic groups, we have different kinds of relationships. And also at the same time, because of all these things, then the question of the ownership that we are talking about, why it become a conflict, matter of conflict. So that is something that we need to look at it. So at the end of the day, the question is, why ownership? For whom? So if it is for, as an indigenous community, as a member of an indigenous community, ownership is for our identity. And how is our identity characterized? It is characterized through historical factors, through social factors, economic factors, and cultural factors. So historical factors, we have so much of commonality between the different ethnic people here in like, for example, let me talk in the context of Manipur. We have so many different, similar historical facts. A lot of the ethnic nationalities or ethnic communities, or we call it the tribal communities that we have in Manipur, we normally talk about the cave theory. But correct me if I'm wrong, but for the Meitei, I don't think they have the cave theory concept. So historically, when we think of that, we have so much of relationship between the different tribes that live in living in Manipur. So that commonality is there. And also in terms of, at the same time, the history of our settlement, the folk tales or the migration that we were there. So we have so many stories from one particular place. Oh, our forefathers were there. Oh, we have this kind of a story with that particular place. So there are lots of migration history that is common for quite a lot of us. So then when we come to the social history, which is the social factor, which is a part of our identity, we are talking about the different social cultural, the social structure system, and that also includes the language. Then if we go down to the economic factors, and we are also talking about the different kinds of practices for our livelihood. Some people have different ways of doing different things for our livelihood. So based on that also, that our identity is our identity is also known through our economic activities. Like for example, in some of the some particular tribes, we normally have the tendency to say that, oh, that tribe is very famous for this kind of bamboo work or for this kind of pottery work and stuff like that. So that itself is also identity. So when we come to the cultural factor, then we have the explicit and the implicit part. So what is important is the explicit part, because when we talk of economic or social or the historical factors, or even that kind of that thing, then it is not something that we can take it along with us. But the explicit part of the culture is something that is the formal appearance of our culture, which we can carry it along with us. So in this is where our traditional clothes and attires become extremely important, because it's the explicit part of our culture. Now, I just wanted to touch upon a little bit on the subjectivity of ownership, especially on our traditional handloom and textiles. Like, for example, when we, so on one hand, I support the whole idea of subjectivity of ownership, but on the other hand, it's also about, because having stated all the factors, we have so many people living side by side. How is it possible that we are going to create something that is extremely so different and so unique than the rest of the other communities? Because we share so many there are so many common things amongst us, whether even to the extent of the cave theory. Forget about the others, the economic or the other things. So how is it possible that we're going to make something, create something that is extremely, completely so different from the rest of the others? And which is not possible. And that is also the reason why we see quite a lot of different communities claiming ownership to one particular cloth that we have seen. So then why? So I think, for example, giving elephant cloth as the example, the Métis, they call it Shaphilanti, and they have got GI tag in 2014, and which is also known as Hapidasa by the Chakisang, and got it GI registered in 2017. So I'm just comparing this cloth, which is also worn by the Angami, the Mau, Maram, Tangal, Pumei, and Tangkul. So we have about, including the Métis, at least 8 communities who claim ownership of this particular cloth. Now, if we look at this, and because ownership is subjective, and therefore, when we look at the way how they give meanings to those motifs and patterns, there are so much of difference there, because ownership is subjective, and therefore we give different meanings to the same patterns. So I was just cross-checking what was written in the GI applications between Shaphilanti and Hapidasa, and also what the Tangkul call it Raibat, and what has been written about Raibat. So then, of course, it's known as elephant cloth. So everybody says that, yes, that the patterns includes elephant, and the pattern includes horse, because it's the motifs are so clear that and peacock. So these are the main 3 things which is very clear, and all the 3 communities claim that there's elephant, there's horse, and there's peacock. But when we look at the other motifs, what is claimed as fish by one community is claimed as butterfly by another community and is claimed as sun in another community. But so the interpretation is different because we give meanings to that clothes, and based on the meanings that we give to the clothes, the significance and the values of the clothes differ. And therefore, in many of the communities, it is worn by male, whereas in the Tangkhul society is worn by women, by a woman, especially at the time of marriage. Now, so these are the kind of different meanings that we give to it. But again, the whole question is, I mean, there was an incident where I happened to go through a social media, and then suddenly there was a comment saying that there are certain tribes who claim that this cloth also belongs to them, and they have started wearing it, you know. So it's like somebody is saying that this is our cloth and this is not your cloth, and you have kind of, you know, taken it like borrowed, not really borrowed, but like appropriating, you know, something of that sort. But if we fail to understand the historical factors, the migration, you know, our own ethno history of our of how we came, from where we came, and kind of a thing, then I think that's bound to happen. So obviously somebody will say that this is our cloth, they are stealing it, they are using it. So but on the other hand, I think what is important is that
Dr. Achan, may I just interject? Yeah, could you please wrap it up so that we can go into discussion?
yeah.
Thank you so much.
So I'm just winding up. So I think what is important is for us to understand that ownership is subjective, but when we talk of ownership, we are talking about community ownership. We are not talking about individual ownership. And secondly, just because we owned this and we have given meanings to it, doesn't mean that it fulfills the purpose of only my community. It also has a different purpose for the other communities. So it's very important to understand the historical factors, the geographical locations, and the ethnic relationship amongst ourselves. Then only we will be able to you know, be more accommodative, and maybe think even about joint ownership, which is very much a part of the GI process. So that is something that we need to look at it also. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Achan. Very interesting point. I want to go to Oja Mangangsana on what he thinks, you know, on the on what Dr. Achan was saying about this shared history, you know, of the migration history and all these cultures that we all share, you know, and then the different interpretation that we might have of the same patterns. Uh, Oja, you know, could you please share your thoughts on that?
Uh, I was very excited while Dr. Hassan was uh, giving lecture on this subject. I was very much excited since I have been believing that the people from the Northeast, which belongs to Southeast Asian people, that's kind of proof. So yeah, I have seen such kind of uh, things, matters in previous life. And since I have been traveling throughout the Southeast many countries in the Southeast Asia and the Far East Asia, as well as Middle Asia. Because there are so many similarities between this group, this kind of people, and of course the patterns, the colors, as well as, to my concern, it was the music. The music of these people from Southeast Asia, which is very fascinating, and still, which it's not being uh, properly bring up to the world, to the it's what we call the modern world. So of course we can see that whatever it
Oja,
may be done.
I'm not able to hear you properly. Maybe it's your mic. Maybe your mic is a little far from you.
I think it is. Am I? Are you audible now? Clearly? Hello.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Very sorry then. So that is Dr. Asang was saying that we should not have to, I mean, because like this kind of authority, or what should we say, that there's not, there should not be very much authority of anything what we have here, because we belong to some very similar community, very similar races. So whatever it may the patterns, or what it may be the colors, or what it may be the sound or music or words, everything. So okay, it is the significant is that we, whatever the words or whatever the name we have given to the sound, or the clothings or something, or the foods, name of the foods, or whatever the houses, everything. This is what we have to consider about everything. Like what if Dr. Rattan just mentioned, the Safilan. We call it Safilan. The same pattern or very similar pattern might be called, named by some other communities from the Southeast Asian people, maybe from the Navas group, or maybe from the Kuki group, or maybe from the Myanmar, or maybe from China. Because the similar patterns, we can find it from the Tibetan peoples. Yeah, I have seen that's the, it is very unique that there's a very round shape pattern, which is very unique in the South Asian people. And as well as it is a rigid shape of uh, patterns, rigid shape like a triangular or rectangular thing, which is a very similar. And of course, the most similar part is the most similar thing is the colors. The colors are very unique in the South Asian people. So I agree that there's some similar. They have, we have, and everybody in everything, every community in the South Asian people have very similar people. We don't have to claim that authorship of this kind of thing, but we have to say that such kind of things, that we have a name on such things. We have to mention it clearly. We don't have to dare about the GI things and whatever. So that is what my concern. We have to mention clearly that this kind of patterns or this kind of colors is being used by this community or this kind of people from the since whatever the history can be traced, or maybe myth, or maybe in the folklore, or maybe in the some kind of a folk song. So we have to mention it clearly, very much carefully in these days. Otherwise, uh, the, the trace, the future people, the new generation may not have traced the linkage between the human beings, the very similar people, and very similar cultural relationship between the people. So that is what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Does any of the panelists want to say something, add on to what Oja was saying, or want to oppose something? Or are we talking about positive appropriation? I mean, does it exist? I mean, positive appropriation. Is there anything like that? Maybe Dr. Keditsu can help me with this.
No, I think what Dr. Achan and Sir had, I think what they've underscored very, very clearly and very beautifully is that, and what I also said in my presentation is, all creation is, in a way, some kind of inspiration and appropriation. There's no such thing as, that's something that I've very explicitly said in my presentation, that there's no such thing as pure creation. There's always, some kind of seepage, some kind of inspiration. And that's why, as Dr. Achan has said, for communities living together in contiguous areas for a prolonged period of time, it isn't surprising that many of our textiles share similar motives, and perhaps maybe to an outsider may even look very similar. But I think then what Sir has also said is, and again, what I've also underscored in my presentation is the need to give credit to the people or the cultures or the inspirations that have been taken in order to make something. I think that tracing back and that, paying one's debts, as I've said, is very important.
Very interesting. So, if there is if all the creations are all interconnected, then is there a need to even go for things such as GI tag, or or owning ki, okay, this is mine, this is theirs? If if the argument is that ki, we all share the same thing. Maybe Dr. Achan can share something on that.
I was trying to unmute and I stopped my video. I'm so good in using all this kind of gadget. No, just because what I was essentially trying to say is that, we have the tendency that the ethnocentrism, it's not only in terms of our social, structural, or political, or any other sense, but even in terms of our own culture, in terms of our handloom and textile, the explicit thing that I was talking about, we are so ethnocentric. We also have we always have the tendencies to say that ours is the best, we are the best. How can the other community do that? Because we can do much better. Our culture is the best. We have this ethnocentrism, but we forgot that culture, the culture that we are talking about, it may be the culture of a big community or it may be the culture of a small community, but that doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it's a culture, it's a traditions that they have practiced over the centuries, over the years, that they have brought them what they are, they have made them what they are today. And each and every culture, whether big or small, that is in terms of the population, right? Because you are able to influence others, you are not able to influence others. So but we have the tendency to always overlook small communities because their culture are not much known by the outside world. So essentially what I'm trying to say is that because what we need to do is that we need to respect other culture. So just because you are a big, you are from the big community and your culture is well known doesn't mean that, like for example, the Meitei, they got the Shapi Lanpi GI registered without informing the other communities when they know very well that all the other 5-6 communities wear the same clothes. So we need to give respect, or we need to respect others' culture, and not by thinking that ours is unique and therefore, it has to be only ours, and therefore I want to take in terms of legality, GI is essentially for legal process, isn't it? Because as long as any community can come up with their own documentation stating all the uniqueness or the importance of the cloth, then that serves the purpose. But for the legal process, we need GI tag, that's all.
I agree. And, in the case of GI tagging, for example, Basmati, the GI tag for Basmati is not owned only by one community. There are, a number of communities that own the GI tag for Basmati. So the idea that just because one community GI tags a commodity or, a product, that other communities are not allowed, that is, another, I think that's problematic. And even if just for legal purposes, the beauty of being allowing as many communities as possible to GI tag any commodity or product is that, as Dr. Achan has said in her presentation, it opens up, the options of the kinds of narratives and meanings that each community attributes to that commodity or product. So it may be the same shawl, but the thing is, the kinds of meanings and symbolisms that become legally viable is expanded. And I think that is in the interest of all communities.
I may share one very point, which might not be actually as we have been talking about, but I think it is a very related with it. Since I have been traveling throughout many different communities in Manipur, and I was very shocked to see that there are merely 100 people in one community. So since I have been there, I have been living, or I have been working with them. Since I aware that we, the Meitei, I belong to Meitei community, which is the most biggest community in Manipur. So since I have belonged from there, I always been talking with this smaller community that we Meitei doesn't have to bring you up, or what we don't have to popularize you, because you have to popularize yourself, because your song, your culture, your language, what is your food, it is very precious. So we have been collecting, we have been documenting such things, but we have not seen. I mean, we have not sent to the other people, or not in the YouTube or our social media, because it belongs to them. Whatever documentation we have done, we have given to them, and we have been telling them that you please do sharing with this documentation your people, your younger generation, whatever the song or whatever the words or whatever the foods or the clothing, what have you have done. You have been in your tradition, which is very important to us, which is very important to the people of this world, not only for the Manipuri. Existing, the questions of existence is, which is very important to us. Not being like I belong to Meitei, or I belong to Tuki, or I belong to Tangkul is not important in this modern world right now. The thing is that what, why, how you have been existing in this world, which is more important, and to know your tradition, to know your culture is more important, because without knowing myself, without knowing yourself, we may not be something, because we have been brave in such a system. That is a, I hope you may understand. We have been brave in such a system that everything goes beyond our own will. So something we need to understand, that our existence is more important, to follow the tradition or not to follow, or to understand our own culture or not, which is which is maybe important or not important, but the knowing our just existence is more important to me. So this is my experience, that your existence should be, let it know to the your younger generation. Otherwise, nobody will come to help you. So please, Dr. Sang, uh, your presentation was great. That that GI tagging, I think which is a very scientific way of earning in the market. But some at the same time, which makes some people makes angry a lot. We also, we in the northeastern people, we are also having very much difficulties on such GI tagging, about this brown rice, about this fermented soya beans, everything. We have been arguing on these things. Of course, we have to argue. We have to fight for our own identity, and as well as I feel every community have the right to claim it is our. and I will say again, GI tagging doesn't have to make us stop to claim ourselves. So GI tagging is something which is led by for the marketing or the business or something, which I think they have some few tenure of years. But to reach out to the people, that what we have, what we are known for, or what we call it, which is more important, modern GI. So uh, everyone have right to say this is our, this is belongs to my community, this belongs to my parents, this belongs to my ancestors. So please carry on.
Thank you, Oja. I think what Oja was saying was, our traditions, our cultures are much more than a GI tag. What we essentially need to do is maybe, teach or spread more awareness in our roots, in our at the grassroots level, in our education system, or through our own ways. But still, because it is a field of Dr. Achan, I still want to know what Dr. Achan has to say or comment on this.
1 second. Okay. I'm audible, right? Um,
Yes.
if we look at the way IPR functions in the country, it's amazing. Like in 1 year, the government of India makes more than, just 1 second, I think I've written that somewhere, but just to have some fun. In 2017 and 18, Indian government, they makes 477 crores, 6,60,000 just for the registration fees on IPRs, whether it is for patent or trademark or copyrights, and that also includes GI. GI is something that is very new, yeah. So it started only somewhere in 2000, something like that. And if you look at the way how aggressively the government of India is pushing for GI tech, now so when we look at the 70, like 477 crores that the government make in a year just from getting the registration fees, that you pay 5,000 per material or per object. So just if you give 5,000, then if you total it up, you're getting this much of money. It's actually business. You look at how many firms, law firms have established in India just to facilitate IPR process, whether for patent or for copyright, for trademark or and geographical indication. And all the GI offices, we don't have any law firms in Manipur. So we have to hire some of the law firms, which is based in Delhi or in Chennai, in Kolkata. And for each and every product that we want to get GI tag, we have to spend about 10 lakhs. So it has actually become a business. So very recently, there was a phone call from TriFed. And because the central government have asked them to get GI registered, to start doing GI process in our region, so that, as many products can be GI tagged. So it doesn't matter to them whether the community really wants the GI tag or not, but they are the one coming and searching to do GI tag. So GI tag on one hand has actually become a business for people to make money out of it. But like I said, it's a legal process. But what is more important is for the community to have our own documentation, to document what the different kinds of clothes that is worn by the community, how important it is, what are the significance, what are the values, what are the uniqueness of these clothes. But how many communities, how many people in our region have documented those things? They don't. So on one hand, I'm glad that I got to know a little bit about the GI process, because at least by looking at the format that they have, it gives me an idea how to do documentation for ourselves, not necessarily to get GI tagged. And so when some of the handloom and textiles that have been refused or rejected or abandoned at the GI, does it stop being ours? No. Because as long as the community owns it, as long as the community says that it belongs to us, then it belongs to us. But look at very recently the Chakesang case, and why they are able to do it, because they have GI tag. Now, look at the business with the IPR thing. And that particular business is going to come to our region. Look at the central government pushing into our area for GI tag, which means that they are targeting exports from our region, which is all everything to do with money making. So when all these things comes to our area, do you think that we will be able to stand by ourselves without having some kind of a legal measures to fight against them when it is being appropriated? So if we think that we can do it like for example, when some of the designer was appropriating, I don't understand the whole question of positive appropriation or something like that. Maybe it would be great if somebody can tell me, because appropriation can never be positive. We can always talk in terms of evolution of the patterns and designs as time goes by, but I cannot talk about positivity. But when we were talking about all these things, I think what is important is that if it is within ourselves, then we have our own mechanism to ask the designer to come, or the person who had created, and to give accountability to the community, because none of the traditional knowledge that we have is actually, it belongs to the community. The folk songs, the folk tales, the handloom and textiles that we have, it belongs to the community. It doesn't belong to an individual. And therefore, what happened is that when such designer come, then they are made accountable by the community. But can we make somebody from outside, whether a foreigner or from Indian mainland, accountable to our community when they take away our design? Because that falls within our customary laws and our customary rights. Because for them, our custom has no meanings. So why should they respect our customs in that sense? So that is why we need the legal measure to protect our traditional clothes and attire, handloom and textile. And therefore, we need to do the GI tag. But whether we get it or not is a different thing. But just, I mean, like, for example, the Ao, the Sunni, they also tried, but they didn't get it, right? But that doesn't stop them from owning those clothes. So for me, that's my position. It's a legal process, which is very important. Maybe we can see, it's about any international instruments or measures which exist in this world. It's about how you make best use of it. You can take the best out of it. Such international legal instruments are there, or facilities are there. How do we make it into positive use? Because they have joint ownership in the GI process. So can some of the communities who share the same clothes come together and make use of it? So it's how we make use of the different benefits that is, or instruments that is available at the international as well as national level.
That's great, Dr. Song. So finally, you have speak out. I'm very happy to learn that we can do together. I mean, we can do in our achieve the goal all together. Since that's whatever the patterns, whatever the materials, or whatever the song, or whatever the script, it belongs to us. So we will fight. We can do all together. Not, yeah, you have said very nice and very nice things, very positive things. Yeah, I agree with you.
Dr. Keditsu has been like nodding all the way, like while Dr. Chan is saying. So I wonder what Dr. Keditsu has to say. Just for the sake of argument, if I am to say, how can we measure? Let's say if somebody else, an outsider, comes in and that person genuinely wants to, genuinely respects it and has done, long years of research on an indigenous topic and issues, and he genuinely respects it. So how do we measure, where does the ethics come in? When we have been discussing about this common migration theory, like how we all share the same thing. So where is that line? Where is that ethics drawn?
I'm nodding so much because I'm actually learning a lot from my co-panelists. I find whatever they're saying very interesting. I think with GI tagging, or I think with any kind of a new kind of practice that comes, it can be disruptive and divisive. But one of the promising things about law and any kind of legal measure is it essentially boils down to interpretation. How do we interpret these laws or these legal actions? And I think if we remain rooted, because one thing that, again, all of us Northeast communities have in common is our sense of community, our sense of, like, we don't think as individuals, we think more as, a collective. So if we remain true to our roots, then we will be able to interpret these sort of contemporary foreign laws, in a more communitarian way. And as Dr. Achan has said, this idea of sharing GI tagging, which is something that other communities also do around the world. It's not something that's alien or new. So we know that this is possible. And I think one of the ways perhaps the Northeast and communities in the Northeast can become more united, or a modern way to express our unity can be by sharing GI tags. But having said this, the question that you're raising, when we talk about, the ethics of creation, the first thing is, I think for the creator to recognize the kind of power they have. Now, here I really appreciate my co-panelist, Sir Mang Sanga, for what he's, for the message that he shared with the smaller communities in Manipur, where he, as a member of, the majority dominant community, doesn't go to these smaller communities and says, give me your songs, give me your music, give me your art, I will do something. But he actually instead chooses to very actively abstain from that kind of extraction and encourages these smaller communities to speak for themselves, to express their own art. And I think that's something very important, because I'm going to use the example of fashion, is that something that doesn't happen. And that's something I think the fashion industry is waking up to. So when we talk about conscious or sustainable fashion, these are issues that communities, especially indigenous or less powerful communities around the world, are beginning to raise. It doesn't make sense if a powerful fashion house from, the first world goes and exploits or extracts crafts and arts and garments from, powerless or less empowered indigenous communities. It makes more sense in the manner that Sir Mang Sanga has said, for them to encourage and revive art and craft. We need to also think about capital. Which way is capital flowing? Are the less powerful or indigenous communities being compensated well enough? Is the money that is being generated from the profits of the profit being generated from the sale of these objects and materials, are they going back to the community? These are things that we need to think about. And only if there is, a considerable flow of profit and reinvestment back into these communities, only if that happens, I think we can start thinking about what is ethical. At the same time, when we talk about creative inspiration, we also need to see if what the designs or the inspiration that is being extracted is true and respects the meanings that it has in the original community. And if this is not the case, then again, we cannot say that this is ethical creation. I just want to cite the example of a designer who recently was, in the news here in Nagaland. So by definition, she's somebody who has worked in the community. She's somebody who claims to have, a very intimate knowledge of the community, claims to be very respectful, claims to love, the Naga community with whom she worked. But what she did was she took shawl designs and put it on a sari. Now, if anybody actually lives and claims to be as in tune and part of any community in the Northeast, then they will surely be aware of the AFSPA, and they will surely be aware that most communities who have, who still, live under this act are quite reluctant to wear the sari. Or I wear the sari, but I would never wear it publicly here in Nagaland because it would offend people. So, I found it very surprising that this designer who claimed to really know, this community and be very part of this Naga community was so unaware about the political significance of a sari and what it meant to Naga people, and so chose to put the designs of a Naga shawl on the body of a sari. So these kinds of things, this kind of blatant, disregard for a people's history, and sometimes that history is very traumatic. These cannot be termed as ethical creation. And here I find that, yes, legal measures and the legal world, etc. But like I said in my presentation, the digital world is something that is quite a powerful means of redressal and recourse, because most companies now have social media accounts. If I may cite the example of, I think, was it Dolce and Gabbana? So when one of the designers of Dolce and Gabbana made a racist statement against, it was directed against Chinese, their customers who were their social media followers in China literally blacklisted them. They lost many followers and they were blacklisted. This is the power of, this is the power of the digital economy. And so as indigenous people who live in this small corner of the world, we still have power. I think there are ways that we can, I will use this very carefully. We can cancel brands and designers. There are ways that we can have our voice heard. There are ways that we can register our protest that don't really need, more powerful and traditional institutions.
I have a very interesting question coming in. The question is, are people of the same community capable of appropriating their own culture? This is open, so anybody, any of the panelists can take over. If can the community themselves appropriate their own culture?
Yeah, I mean, they are not supposed to, because for me, the word appropriation is negative. So I really have to look up on the positive part of it, which I think I should do that, because I haven't, like I said, we have said in the beginning about the positive appropriation, which maybe I need to study further on that. But as of now, as of today, for me, appropriation is negative. And therefore, but we have so many people within the community, because I think what we essentially, many of the indigenous communities or the tribal communities that we call it, we don't have written culture. Written culture is only when Christianity came, we started getting education then, and which is like maybe 150 years, maybe at the most, or maybe 200 years at the most. Before that, we don't have any documentation. So it's only in terms of the stories that is being handed down from generations to generations. But maybe let's say all the designers, I hope so, all the designers that is there now were all born into the shift during the written culture period. They were not, because those people who were there before the written culture, all of them have died. None of them are still alive. I mean, I wouldn't be wrong in saying that. So what happened is that because we have this, I mean, from the oral tradition to the written tradition, that have changed, but our lifestyle haven't changed much, because we are so used to our own traditions and stuff like that. And therefore, we are still finding it difficult to put down everything in the form of documentations. Yes, as an indigenous community, we always say that there are so many things that which cannot be documented. Not everything can be documented, because they are, the nuances of the meanings is lost when it is being documented. That's another argument. But since we do not have any documentation in the true sense, a lot of the young designers actually don't understand the meanings of the motifs and the patterns. Very few. I mean, I've asked some of the people who apparently design new wrapped around or something of that sort, and they just picked up those designs because it looks beautiful to them, and they thought they wanted to mix those colors, those patterns, and it will look beautiful, not because they don't really understand the meaning of the patterns and designs. So when we have so many people like that in our community, why blame the others? Our own community, we ourselves are appropriating it. So it is very much, it very much exists. So documentation is a must. Whether let's forget about the oral tradition. I mean, I'm not saying that we should forget our history, but we don't live in the past anymore. Now everything is is documented, is in written form. We have to start living that.
I agree with Dr. Achan, and when you actually just take the word appropriation, not in its academical, theoretical, but just simply the word appropriation in English itself means taking something without permission. So we know that when you create, perhaps you cannot take permission from everybody for everything. Maybe that's not possible. But I think especially when it comes to things like cultural materials that you're taking, for that, some kind of permission must be taken. And sometimes that permission may not take the form of actual consent. That permission perhaps sometimes can take the form of just simply understanding the meaning of the object or the material from which you are taking an inspiration. Again, I will cite the example of one of our own Naga designers who had a very beautiful, really visually wonderful collection of contemporary Western wear drawn from taking from our Naga textiles. But the problem is one of the women's dresses that he made was using the pattern of the men's shawl, you know. So I'm a feminist. I'm a feminist. I will profess this. But even as a feminist, I appreciate that some of our textiles are for men and some of our textiles are for women. And as much as I may want to smash patriarchy, I will not go to the extent of trying to wear some man's shawl on my body because, you know, in a sense, why should I? We have so many cloths that we have, you know, women have. So the onus of documenting, the onus of trying to learn the meanings, whether it is music, because maybe some of our traditional songs may be meant only to be sung by men. Maybe some of them are private, intimate songs that only women sing. Maybe some of them are for funerals in the same way that our dresses, our cloths, our jewelry, all of these meanings. And this is for everyone who's listening. If you are a designer and if you're a young designer from the Northeast and you want to promote your own culture, the least you can do is to find out what these things mean originally and then decide whether you want to incorporate it in your designs. Because it seems to me that that is the worst kind of appropriation, I think. When an outsider does it, it's okay. We can maybe forgive them for their ignorance, for their, you know, hubris. But when an insider does it, it hurts the most because we expect, and this is one of the most important ways that cultural knowledge is passed on from older to younger generations. When I inherit my grandmother's shawl, I not only inherit an object, I inherit narratives, I inherit generational meanings. So this is the way knowledge is passed on. So as much as you may love fashion and design or music or any form of creation, you are obligated to your community to learn the original meanings before you use them for creating.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kiditsu. Um, I want to ask Oja Mangangsana, since you come from Meitei community, and Meitei community, if we look from the perspective of Manipur state, is the majority community. But if we look from a larger perspective of the Indian nation, it still can be counted as a minority community. So having this dual identity and also working and documenting the indigenous folk traditions of Meitei community, I would really love to hear from you, like where do we draw this line of ethics of appropriation? You know, how do you do it in your line of work?
Uh, Before coming on that topic, uh, yeah, it's a very, it's very tricky as well as. But before coming on that point, I would love to say that I belong to the world, in this world, and I never consider myself as my day. Yes, of course, my name was given by my father. Mayang Lambon is my family name. Mangang Sa is my individual name, and Maite belongs to community. Since it was given by my parents, my father, but right now I'm very much obliged to say that I'm Maite because of most of the time I write myself. I used to say Mayang Lambon Mangang Sa only, not Maite. But officially, I have been given as a Maite. Very sorry to say that. Yeah, of course, whenever I have to say that do something for the, especially for my community. It is not only my day. I always love to do with my all the communities belongs to Manipur, and I always think myself to be a Manipuri, not as a Meitei. And that is the reason why I have no restriction. I have no boundaries on working with the many communities, and still I am doing it. So my youngsters, my students, my children are doing it. So, doing these things, this doesn't mean the questions, because I always not to be consider myself as Meitei all the time. Yes, of course I belong to Meitei, but I never considered myself Meitei. I belong to Manipuri, and first of all, I belong to the one of the people in the world. So that's why I don't have deserve to answer exactly the questions. I'm sorry. Thank you.
I think it's okay. Yeah. Maybe Dr. Achan or Dr. Kiditsu can, throw some light. You wanna share something? We are reaching the end of the session. Uh, will somebody like to give a parting word? Something?
Not a parting word, but for me, I belong. I'm from the Angami tribe, so I don't know in terms of population, but definitely I am from a forward and privileged tribe, as opposed to some other tribes in my state. And then I qualify as a minority in India. But I think it's really important for us. I think this sort of straddling this, the universe of, sort of privileged and dominant and, marginalized and minority, straddling that actually, perhaps helps me to appreciate, I think it opens up one's world and, forces one to be a little more empathetic. And I think that's something that perhaps maybe, all of us would benefit from, is for those of us who are from, maybe the dominant or the privileged communities in our state, for us to actually accept and, own up to that privilege, and to see that that actually gives us some powers that maybe the minority communities don't have, and help us to explore ways in which we can, join hands with minority communities and, you know, um, help ameliorate, everyone. I don't know, it sounds a little sort of idealistic, but I think it's important to own one's privilege also.
Wow, what oh, Dr. Achan, do you want to say something? You just unmuted.
In my context, because we are in Manipur, so my father is a Tangku, so one of the highly populated community in Manipur, Tangku, and my mother is a Tarao, which is the least, the smallest Naga tribe, which even now it's not even 1,000. So 50-50, I've seen both their lives. But for me, being an anthropologist, and if I look at the way with my engagement, I always end up working with the small communities, never with the communities, somewhere, somehow. So for me, because of this anthropological training and background, and also with the experiences of working with the marginalized community most of the time, I think it's, unless we started using the importance of culture in our society as the yardstick to understand what that culture is, then unless we do that, we will continue to look at the minority and the majority in terms of population, in terms of economic status. But for me, really, when we talk of a community, it's all about culture and how they practice, how safe the women are. Like, for example, it's amazing to see how women in many of the Naga tribes that we see in Chandel district, they don't change their clan name. The clan name that they have at the time of the birth is they die with that name, and the different kind of adoption that they have within their social cultural system gives such an amazing protection to the women. So for me, if I have to look in terms of how women are protected and given security, I would say that it's the people, it's the tribes, for example, the Taraus and some of the tribes in Chandel district that I've encountered, which are far more richer than us. So I think we also need to change perspective in those lines. Thank you. Thank you very much for this beautiful time given to us to share our thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you so much. What a powerful way to end this session. We must all be whenever creating creatively or in any ways, be compassionate and always do your research well. So please, youngsters or anybody listening, please do your research well and show some respect to all the cultures and traditions. Thank you so much, Dr. Kedetsu, Ojamangang Sana, and Dr. Achan. I hope we can come together again for a much better, much more difficult topic. So thank you so much.
Thank
Have
you
a good
so much.
evening. Have a good
Thank
evening.
you.
Good evening. Thank you so much.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye.